You did something unholy, huh? Funny thing about that word, unholy. People throw it around like they're saints, like they've never done anything in the dark. But everyone's got a little stain on their soul, something they hide, something they whisper to themselves when the lights go out. You see, what they call unholy isn't always evil. Sometimes it's just real. Sometimes it's the part of you that refused to stay silent. The part that broke the rules to survive. They'll call it sin because it doesn't fit their story. Because it scares them to see you do what they secretly wish they could. But you know what's worse than doing something unholy? Pretending you're pure when you're not. Every sin starts with truth people couldn't handle. That's how it always begins. Not with evil, but with honesty. Someone saw something, felt something, knew something too real for everyone else to stomach. And instead of facing it, they called it sin. They labeled it wrong because it didn't fit inside their fragile little rules. People don't actually hate sin. They hate the mirror it holds up. They hate the reflection that reminds them how thin the line really is between right and real. You ever notice how the most condemned acts are usually born from the same desires everyone hides? The difference is, some people act on them and others just bury them deep. But the truth doesn't die just because you hide it. It rots, it festers, it grows teeth, and when it finally comes out, the world points and says, unholy. But the truth was never unholy. It was just too raw, too honest, too alive for their comfort. Every sin starts with something pure, a need, a dream, a hunger. But purity scares people. They dress it up, chain it down, call it by safer names so they don't have to face what it really is. Desire becomes shame, anger becomes sin, passion becomes taboo. The world teaches you to hide your fire, and when you finally burn anyway, they scream that you've done something wicked. But what did you really do? You told the truth with your actions. You showed them what they're too afraid to admit about themselves. The truth has always been dangerous. It doesn't blend well with control. So they built systems, religions, codes, all to keep it contained. They tell you what's right, what's wrong, what's holy, what's damned. They turn truth into obedience and call it morality. But morality is just a leash made of fear. It's not about good or bad. It's about keeping you predictable. And when someone steps outside that pattern, even for a second, they become a threat. Not because they sinned, but because they revealed how fragile the whole system really is. Sin is what happens when truth refuses to stay buried. When the things you've been taught to suppress finally claw their way out. It's the soul's rebellion against the lie of perfection. You can't cage human nature and expect it not to bite back. Everyone has a breaking point, a moment where silence feels heavier than guilt. And when that moment comes, people do what they must. They choose survival over reputation, freedom over forgiveness. Then the world points and calls it unholy. Just so it doesn't have to admit it, it would have done the same. The word, sin, is a story told by the fearful to control the fearless. It's a label for anything that doesn't fit their comfort zone. You tell the truth too loud. They call it disrespect. You fight back. They call it pride. You follow your heart. They call it rebellion. But the world forgets that every act of creation, every spark of change, every revolution started with someone doing something unholy. They broke a rule, crossed a line, shattered an illusion. That's how progress is born, from the cracks in the old moral walls. The first time you do something they call unholy, it burns. You feel the guilt, the shame, the fear of being seen. But then something strange happens. Underneath the noise, you feel alive. You feel real. Because sin isn't just about breaking the rules. It's about remembering you're human. It's about feeling something raw, something unfiltered, something that reminds you you're not just a cog in their machine. You can't find freedom without first being called wrong by someone who never understood you. The ones who throw stones the loudest are always the ones with the dirtiest hands. They use your sin to hide their own. It's easier to condemn than to confess. So they build walls of judgment to protect themselves from reflection. They call themselves righteous because it keeps them from looking in the mirror. But they know, deep down, they know. They envy the courage it takes to do something unholy, to act on a truth they only dare to dream about. People fear truth because it exposes them. It strips away the polite masks, the good manners, the false halos. It shows them what they really are: imperfect, hungry, human. That's why they'd rather call the truth sinful. Because if it's sin, they don't have to face it. They can stay safe inside their illusion of holiness, pretending their cages are made of virtue. But those cages always crack. And when they do, the truth seeps out. Ugly, messy, unstoppable. Every sin starts with truth people couldn't handle. Someone saw through the lie. Someone felt something real, and the world couldn't take it. So they called it sin to make themselves feel better. But the truth doesn't care what name you give it. It doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't apologize for being real. It just stands there, unholy and undeniable, reminding everyone that holiness was never about purity. It was about control. And control only works until the truth decides to speak. Guilt is just society's way of keeping you obedient. It's not born inside you. It's planted. A seed buried deep in your mind when you were too young to question it. Every time you think for yourself, every time you step out of line, that seed grows a little thorn. You feel it twisting in your chest, whispering, "You shouldn't." That's guilt. A voice that doesn't belong to you, but one you've learned to obey. It's the invisible chain that keeps everyone in place, pretending, performing, apologizing for being human. They teach you guilt early like a trick. You do something natural, feel angry, want more, speak up, and someone tells you it's wrong. They frown, they scold, they make you feel small, and you learn fast. Being yourself comes with punishment. So you start trimming pieces of who you are just to fit into their box. They call it discipline, but it's training. They're not raising thinkers, they're building followers. People who feel guilty for wanting anything that doesn't serve the system. Guilt isn't justice. It's control. It keeps you crawling back to the rules even after they've failed you. You could burn, starve, bleed, and still feel guilty for asking. Why? That's how deep it goes. They make you believe that pain is virtue, that suffering is holy, that wanting peace is selfish. So you keep quiet. You play along. You let the guilt weigh you down like a leash, because you're too afraid to know who you'd be without it. The strange part is, guilt doesn't stop bad people from doing wrong. It only stops good people from being free. The cruel, the powerful, they don't feel guilt. They call it strategy, necessity, survival. But the honest ones, the ones who still feel something, they're the ones guilt eats alive. It convinces them to apologize for existing, for speaking, for feeling too much. It turns good hearts into prisoners, always seeking forgiveness for sins they never actually committed. Guilt has a taste. Bitter, metallic, heavy. It sits on your tongue after you tell the truth. It burns in your stomach after you say, no. It whispers that you've disappointed someone, that you've broken a rule, that you should have stayed quiet. And because the world worships obedience, you believe it. You think guilt means you've done something wrong. But sometimes guilt means you're finally doing something right. Sometimes it's not a warning. It's a sign you're waking up. You ever wonder why people in power love talking about guilt? It keeps everyone else small. A guilty person is easy to control. They don't fight back. They don't question. They spend their lives trying to make up for something that wasn't even their fault. They carry invisible weight, apologizing for things like existing, dreaming, failing. Guilt turns people into puppets who think they're sinners when they're just human. It's the perfect weapon. No force, no violence, just shame. The thing about guilt is, it doesn't come from what you did. It comes from who you disappointed. Every time you break a rule, you don't feel bad because the rule was right. You feel bad because someone taught you to. They gave you that feeling like a hand-me-down curse. You carry it without asking why. And before long, it becomes instinct. You start punishing yourself before anyone else has to. You become your own jailer, your own judge. That's how they win. They don't need to lock you up. They just teach you to hate the sound of your own freedom. People think guilt is morality, but it's not. It's fear of judgment disguised as conscience. It's the ghost of every rule you never agreed to, haunting you every time you try to live differently. They tell you guilt makes you good, but it doesn't. It makes you manageable. A guilty mind is easier to steer. It bends, apologizes, hesitates. It does what it's told, not because it believes, but because it's afraid of being labeled wrong. Real freedom starts where guilt ends. When you realize that guilt isn't your voice, that it doesn't come from your soul, but from the world's expectations, something inside you breaks loose. You start to see how much of your life was built around pleasing people who were never watching. How much of your silence was obedience dressed as decency. Guilt keeps you small because it convinces you you're dangerous when you start thinking for yourself. But you're not dangerous, you're awake. They want you to believe guilt makes you human. But humanity isn't about guilt. It's about awareness. It's about choice. You can't feel true compassion while drowning in guilt. Because guilt isn't empathy. It's fear. It's self. Punishment dressed as virtue. They've turned it into a tool to make you doubt your own instincts. Every time you say no, they call it heartless. Every time you stand up, they call it arrogant. Every time you choose yourself, they call it selfish. And you feel guilty, even though you were just being honest. That's the game. Guilt is the leash you never notice until it's pulled. It tugs when you start to rise, when you step out of their line, when you remember you have your own voice. You feel it pulling you back, whispering, "Don't go too far." But far is exactly where the truth begins. Guilt keeps you soft, keeps you sorry, keeps you from realizing that maybe you weren't wrong at all. Maybe you were just the only one brave enough to act without their permission. The unholy are simply the honest ones caught in the act. That's the secret no one likes to admit. The ones branded as sinners, monsters, outcasts. They're just the ones who stopped pretending. They did what everyone else dreams of, but doesn't dare to do. They spoke what others whisper. They acted on truths others bury. And the world can't stand that. Because when someone dares to live without disguise, it exposes how fake everyone else is. Society doesn't hate sin. It hates exposure. It hates the reminder that beneath all the smiles and sermons, everyone's got a little dirt on their hands. You ever notice how people love to point fingers? The louder they scream, "Unholy," the more they're hiding. It's projection in its purest form. They attack what they see in themselves. The one who shames desire is the one consumed by it. The one preaching purity is the one drowning in guilt. They can't face their reflection, so they break the mirror. They call others corrupt, just to distract from the cracks in their own halo. That's how it works. The so-called righteous need sinners to stay relevant. Without someone to condemn, their holiness means nothing. Being unholy isn't about evil. It's about honesty. It's what happens when you stop filtering your humanity to make it palatable. When you stop apologizing for feeling too much, wanting too deeply, thinking too freely. They call that rebellion. But it's not rebellion. It's nature. The real rebellion is living truthfully in a world built on lies. And those who do, they pay the price. They get labeled, judged, exiled. But deep down, everyone envies them. Because while the holy ones live in cages of rules and appearances, the unholy ones breathe. People crave freedom but fear what it looks like. They think they want liberation until they meet someone who actually lives it. Then they call it madness. Because freedom without guilt, without shame, without masks, it's too raw. It reminds them how much of their life is performance. They pretend to be good because they're terrified of being seen as real. They think goodness is about image, about reputation. But the ones they call unholy, they already lost that game. They stopped caring what the world thinks. That's why they're dangerous. You can't control someone who's not afraid to be seen. Every saint has a sinner's story. Every sinner has a saint's reason. The difference is only exposure. Who got caught? Who didn't? The world doesn't judge by truth. It judges by timing. Do the wrong thing at the right moment, and you're bold. Do the right thing at the wrong moment, and you're damned. The unholy ones are simply those whose truths came out when the world wasn't ready to hear them. History turns them into villains, then later, legends. That's the cycle. Today's unholy is tomorrow's misunderstood visionary. What's funny is that the unholy never pretend to be perfect. They already know what they are. They've seen their shadows, touched their hunger, made peace with their flaws. They don't wear masks because they've already faced what's behind them. It's the holy ones you need to worry about. The ones desperate to look pure, to sound righteous, to be adored. They're the ones hiding monsters behind smiles. The unholy don't need to hide. They've already been exposed. And there's a strange kind of peace in that. When the world has already seen your worst, you're free to be honest. The world runs on hypocrisy. They tell you to be good but reward deceit. They preach truth but celebrate performance. They say, be yourself, but only if that self fits their comfort zone. So when someone refuses to shrink, refuses to fake it, they become a problem. The unholy aren't criminals. They're reminders. They remind the world of everything it's buried, the hunger, the chaos, the contradiction. They live in the open what everyone else hides in secret. That's why they're hated. Not because they're wrong, but because they're proof. The unholy walk through life with a certain stillness. They've stopped begging for forgiveness from people who never meant to forgive them. They've stopped trying to explain their reasons to ears that only want judgment. There's a strange freedom in being condemned. It means you're done performing. You stop living for their approval and start living for your own truth. That's when you become untouchable. Because what can they take from someone who's already been stripped of everything fake? Everyone wants to be holy until it costs them their comfort. Everyone wants truth until it demands exposure. But the unholy, those are the ones who've already been exposed and kept walking. They carry their scars like trophies, reminders of battles fought against illusion. They've been burned, branded, exiled, but never broken. Because the unholy don't live by approval. They live by authenticity. And authenticity is the only holiness that can't be faked. So when they call you unholy, maybe they're just telling the truth without realizing it. Maybe what they really mean is that you stopped pretending, that you've become everything they secretly wish they had the courage to be. Because in a world built on masks, the ones who dare to show their real faces will always look unholy to the blind. You did something unholy, huh? That's what they say when you stop fitting into their little moral mold. When you stop dancing to their tune. They call it unholy because it doesn't serve them. Because it makes them uncomfortable. Because your actions reminded them of how fragile their beliefs are. They spend their whole lives pretending to be pure, pretending to be righteous, And then someone like you comes along and shatters that illusion with one act of honesty. One moment of raw, unfiltered humanity. That's all it takes. One glimpse of truth, and suddenly you're the sinner. You see, the word unholy doesn't mean evil. It means inconvenient. Inconvenient to their lives, to their comfort, to their control. It's what they label you when you step outside the lines they drew to keep you predictable. They don't care what's right or wrong. They care about what keeps the order. And when you disrupt it, they panic. Because deep down, they know the order is fake. It's just fear dressed up as morality. They want you tame, repentant, sorry. They want you to kneel, whisper apologies for daring to exist beyond their permission. That's how they keep their illusion alive. But what if that unholy act wasn't evil at all? What if it was the first real thing you've ever done? Maybe it was messy, reckless, painful, but it was yours. Maybe, for the first time, you didn't follow a rule. You followed instinct. You followed truth. And truth doesn't always look holy. It looks raw. It looks dangerous. It looks alive. The world doesn't hate sin. It hates freedom. Because freedom means you stop asking for permission. It means you stop living for their approval and start living for your own sanity. They'll make you feel dirty for doing what they secretly wish they could. That's the game. They project their hunger onto you, their envy, their shame. They call you unholy to hide their own desires. Because everyone's got a shadow, but most people lock it away and pretend it doesn't exist. You opened the door. You let the shadow breathe. You did what they all think about, but never act on. And that makes you dangerous. Not because you're wrong, but because you're proof that the rules can be broken. They'll try to bury you under guilt. They'll whisper, "How could you?" As if they wouldn't. They'll act horrified, but their eyes will linger just a second too long. Because deep down, they recognize it. They see a piece of themselves in your so-called sin. That's why they have to condemn you, to protect the illusion that they're different. But they're not. They just haven't been caught being honest yet. The beauty of doing something unholy is that it strips away pretense. It forces you to face who you are without the noise of what the world expects. There's no mask left to hide behind, no sermon to excuse yourself with. It's just you, raw and exposed. And in that nakedness, there's a strange kind of truth. You see what you're made of. You see what matters and what was never real. You see that unholy is just another word for awake. The ones who never get their hands dirty, they're the ones who live half alive. Too scared to fall, too scared to feel. They trade passion for safety, truth for reputation. But the ones who've done something unholy, they've crossed a line they can never uncross. And in that crossing, they see the world for what it is. They learn that morality isn't black and white. It's painted by whoever's holding the brush. They realize that sometimes you have to step into the dark to understand what light really is. They'll tell you to repent, to cleanse yourself, to erase the evidence of your imperfection. But maybe imperfection is the point. Maybe being unholy just means you stopped lying about being perfect. The cracks in your story aren't mistakes. They're proof you lived. They're proof you felt. They're proof you made choices that belong to you, not to the world. Everyone wants purity until they realize purity is emptiness. There's no growth there, no depth, no soul. The unholy ones, they've lived. They've tasted truth, and truth is never sterile. You did something unholy because you acted on what they suppress. You followed the whisper they pretend not to hear. You chose reality over image. And yes, it scared them. Because nothing terrifies people more than someone who can't be shamed. They can take everything from you. But if you stop apologizing, if you wear your sin like armor, they lose their power. That's what holiness was never meant to be: control. They made it a weapon, and you refused to kneel. You didn't destroy goodness by doing something unholy. You destroyed the illusion that goodness needs to look perfect. You reminded the world that even in the dirt, there's beauty. Even in the chaos, there's truth. That maybe sin and salvation aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. You fall, you rise, you fall again. That's not corruption. That's life. That's the pulse of being human. So maybe, when they call you unholy, you should smile. Because what they're really saying is that you've lived without their leash. That you've seen something real. That you've touched the part of yourself they're too afraid to meet. You did something unholy. And for the first time, it was real. Everyone's got a line they swear they'd never cross until life drags them to it. Then, suddenly, that line starts to blur. You tell yourself you're different, that you're in control, that you know where the edge is. But when the moment comes, when your back's against the wall and the world's pressing down on your throat, you realize the edge isn't a line, it's a mirror. And in that reflection, you see something you've been avoiding your whole life, what you're truly capable of. That's when you do something unholy. Not because you wanted to, but because pretending to be innocent doesn't survive reality for long. People love to talk about choices, as if they're clean, simple, righteous. But choices aren't made in sunlight. They're born in shadows. No one chooses the dark until the light turns its back on them. And when it does, when everything you counted on vanishes, you stop caring about what's right. You start caring about what works. That's the truth most people choke on. They judge from a distance, with clean hands and calm hearts. But when they're the ones in the fire, they'll reach for anything to survive. They'll cross lines, break vows, make deals with devils they swore didn't exist. And afterward, they'll pretend it wasn't them. They'll call it weakness or madness or a moment of sin. But it wasn't. It was honesty. The kind that doesn't need forgiveness. They tell you doing something unholy means you've lost yourself. But maybe it means you finally found yourself. The self that doesn't exist just to please, obey, or fit in. The one that's been waiting for you under all the polite lies and quiet fears. Because deep down, everyone's got a version of themselves they've buried. The one that doesn't care about approval. the one that's tired of pretending. And sometimes you ever feel it, that strange silence before something big happens. It's not peace, it's pressure. The air starts to thicken, the lights flicker a little, and you can almost hear the world holding its breath. People call it coincidence, luck, timing, but it's something else. Something you can't see, but you know it's there. It's like the universe just leaned in, real close, waiting for your next move. You ever notice how quiet it gets right before everything changes? Not the kind of quiet that calms you. The kind that makes your skin crawl, like the world's holding something back, like it's waiting for you to notice. Everyone else keeps moving, talking, scrolling, pretending it's just another day, but you feel it. That pulse in the silence. That pressure that makes your chest feel heavier, like the air itself is watching. That's not nothing. That's alignment. That's the universe pulling strings in the background, setting the stage for something you can't see yet. They think silence means nothing's happening. That if they can't see the progress, there isn't any. But that's the trick, isn't it? The best moves are made in silence. The loud ones are distractions. You ever seen how calm the ocean looks before a storm? That's what's happening now. Everything looks still, but underneath, the tides are shifting. You can't hear it. You can't name it, but deep down, you know something's changing. Something's about to break loose, and it's not random. It's preparation disguised as stillness. Most people panic in that quiet. They think the silence means they've been forgotten. They start shouting, begging for signs, clawing at the walls, demanding answers. They can't handle not knowing. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the silence isn't punishment. It's a test. To see if you can hold your ground when there's no applause. No validation, no proof. Because that's where the real shift happens. In the dark, when no one's watching. That's when alignment starts. Not when everything's loud and bright, but when it's eerily still. Like the calm before the curtain rises. You've been through hell, haven't you? People walked out, things fell apart. Plans went up in flames, and you thought it was the end. But maybe that chaos wasn't destruction. Maybe it was clearing. Clearing out everything that couldn't stay. Every person who left, every door that closed, every failure that broke you. It wasn't punishment. It was pruning. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was space being made for what's coming. But most can't see that because they're too busy mourning what was, instead of sensing what's forming. The silence is where the shift breathes. It's where you're rebuilt piece by piece without even realizing it. You start losing interest in things that once consumed you. You start feeling disconnected from people who once felt like home. You stop craving noise. That's not depression. It's transformation. The silence isn't there to scare you. It's there to separate you from the old frequency. To strip away the distractions, the attachments, the illusions. Because you can't step into what's next while still clinging to what's done. You ever notice how the world gets eerily calm right before dawn? The streets empty, the birds quiet, the air still. And then, just when it feels endless, the first light breaks through. That's how divine timing works. The silence before the shift is like that. An uncomfortable pause before the breakthrough. It's not random. It's coordination. Everything's aligning behind the scenes. People, opportunities, moments, all circling toward you. Waiting for the exact second you're ready. Not when you think you're ready. When you are. There's a difference. The silence teaches patience the hard way. It makes you question everything. Your purpose, your progress, your worth. It feels cruel, but that's the refining fire. It burns away your need for control, for approval, for constant proof. It leaves you raw, stripped, honest. That's the version of you that can handle the next chapter. That's why it hurts. Growth doesn't come with background music. It comes with silence so loud it forces you to listen. When things get too quiet, people start to think they've been abandoned. But maybe that's when they're finally being trusted. Because when something greater moves, it doesn't announce itself. It shifts quietly, rearranging pieces you don't even know exist. The silence isn't empty. It's heavy with movement. You just can't hear it yet. The seeds you planted months ago are cracking open underground. The connections you thought died are resurfacing in unseen ways. Every unanswered prayer, every ignored effort, it's all part of the setup. And the strange thing, the silence before the shift doesn't just test your patience. It tests your faith in yourself. Can you still believe when nothing's happening? Can you still trust when everything's quiet? Can you still move forward when there's no applause? Because the ones who can, those are the ones who catch the wave when it finally rises. Everyone else, they'll be too busy complaining about the silence to recognize the signal. The silence before the shift isn't a pause. It's the inhale before the universe exhales. You think nothing's happening, but in truth, everything is. The silence is the sound of the universe aligning your chaos into order. It's the sound of things finding their rightful place, of people being positioned, of doors unlocking quietly in the distance. The silence is alive. It's deliberate. It's sacred. It's the last breath before everything you've been waiting for starts moving toward you. Funny how people think rejection means they've been denied something. They take it personally, like life looked them in the eye and said, "You're not enough." They don't see the game behind it, the setup hidden inside the silence. Every rejection, every unanswered call, every time the world turned its back, it wasn't dismissal, it was direction. You were being rerouted, moved, not denied, redirected. But most can't handle that kind of patience, can they? They crave control. They want the map, not the mystery. And that's why they break before the breakthrough even begins. You ever notice how people curse the delay? They call it failure because they can't see the preparation. They want everything now, instantly, on demand. But anything real takes time to build. You don't rush storms, you don't hurry fire, and you sure as hell don't speed up destiny. It's funny how everyone prays for a big future, but no one's willing to wait through the silence that builds it. They think waiting is weakness, but it's not. It's proof. Proof that something's working in the background. Even when it looks like nothing's moving, the world has this way of disguising blessings as losses. You lose a job, a friend, an opportunity, and it feels like the universe just slammed a door in your face. But maybe that door was never yours. Maybe the rejection was protection in disguise. Maybe that silence wasn't the absence of movement. It was the sound of something better shifting into place. You don't notice it because it doesn't announce itself. It just happens quietly, piece by piece, like a puzzle coming together in the dark. The funny part: you never realize what those rejections were saving you from until later. Until you look back and think, if I'd gotten what I wanted back then, I'd be trapped right now. That's when you start to see the pattern, the divine irony of it all. Every heartbreak, every closed door, every delay, it wasn't punishment. It was preservation. The rejection that broke your heart was the redirection that saved your future. But you couldn't see that through the tears. You were too focused on the loss to notice the alignment. Sometimes what feels like silence is just timing playing its part. You think nothing's happening because you can't see it yet. But the unseen doesn't need your permission to move. It's already in motion. Things are being arranged. People are being shifted. Opportunities are being timed down to the breath. You're standing in the middle of a setup so complex that if you saw it all at once, your mind would crack under the weight of it. So the universe keeps it hidden. It lets you think nothing's working, just so you learn to trust without proof. People always say, everything happens for a reason, but they don't really believe it. They believe it when things are going their way, but not when they're falling apart. When the plan collapses, when the call doesn't come, when the dream feels dead, they panic. They forget that destruction and creation often sound the same. That sometimes the delay isn't denial, it's design. Because if the pieces don't fall apart, the right ones can't fall together. You ever think maybe your frustration is proof that you're being prepared for more than you expected? You keep wondering why the door won't open. But maybe it's because what's behind it isn't big enough for you anymore. Maybe that rejection was mercy. Maybe that heartbreak was realignment. Maybe life had to push you out of the small room so you'd finally notice the mansion waiting down the road. People hate being pushed out of comfort, but they forget. Comfort is the graveyard of growth. Nothing new lives there. You don't learn patience by waiting. You learn it by being denied every sign that waiting is worth it. You learn it when the silence stretches so long that your mind starts to scream. You learn it when everyone else seems to be moving forward and you're stuck in place. That's where strength is built. Not in the success, but in the stillness. Because when you can stay steady in silence, nothing can shake you when the noise finally comes. Rejection is the world's way of hiding the bigger plan behind closed curtains. It's a setup that doesn't make sense until the lights come on. Every missed opportunity is a reroute towards something more aligned. Every no is making space for a yes that fits who you're becoming, not who you were. The waiting feels cruel because growth feels lonely. But the silence isn't abandonment. It's calibration. It's everything being fine, tuned behind the scenes, preparing to meet you at the exact second you're ready. The truth is, rejection and redirection are twins. You just can't tell them apart in the dark. What you call loss today, you'll call alignment tomorrow. Every delay that made you doubt yourself was part of a plan to make sure you didn't settle for less than you were built for. The universe doesn't rush masterpieces. It takes its time. Because when the timing finally hits, it won't need an announcement. It'll unfold so perfectly. You'll laugh at every moment you ever thought you were forgotten. People always think movement means chaos, noise, action. Something loud enough to notice. They think if they can't see it, it's not real. But the real shifts, the ones that change everything, they happen in silence. They happen when you finally stop clawing at the world, begging it to give you something back. That's when it moves. That's when the unseen starts to breathe around you. Because when you stop trying to control everything, life finally gets the space to do what it was trying to do all along. You see, people are addicted to control. They call it ambition, discipline, focus. But really, it's fear. Fear that if they don't force it, it won't happen. They want to twist fate's arm, make destiny hurry up. They pray and then panic if the answer doesn't come by Tuesday. They don't realize that the very act of forcing kills the flow. You can't demand alignment. You can't rush timing. You can't make the ocean move faster just because you're tired of waiting on the tide. The funny part, when you finally let go, everything starts to click. Not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped choking it. You stopped trying to make things happen and started letting them happen. There's a difference. People don't see it, though. They think surrender means weakness. But surrender isn't defeat. It's understanding that control was the illusion all along. You never had it. You were just too scared to admit it. You ever notice how some things fall apart the moment you stop fighting for them? That's because they were never meant to stay. The things that belong to you really belong. They don't need you to wrestle them into existence. They align. They flow. The right people, the right moments, the right doors. They don't require your panic to appear. They just need your peace. But most people can't stand peace. It's too quiet, too still, and in that silence, they have to face themselves. That's why most people never see the unseen moving. They're too busy making noise. They're screaming for signs, begging for proof, while the real shift is happening in the spaces they refuse to sit in. Stillness terrifies them because it exposes their need for control. It makes them feel small, vulnerable, and no one likes that feeling. So they keep running, keep chasing, keep forcing, hoping that the noise will drown out the waiting. But all it does is delay what's already on the way. It's almost funny how people pray for miracles and then panic when they don't see fireworks. They think divine movement means spectacle. But sometimes the miracle is the silence. The fact that you didn't break when everything fell apart. The fact that you're still here, breathing, after life tried to crush you. That's movement. That's alignment. But people miss it because it doesn't look dramatic enough. They want a sign that screams. They don't notice the whisper that saves. There's a moment that comes when you've exhausted yourself trying to make everything work. You've pushed, planned, and pleaded until you're empty. And in that emptiness, something shifts. Not outside you, but inside. You stop begging. You stop fighting. And then suddenly, doors start to open. Calls come through. Opportunities show up. It feels like magic, but it's not. It's just you finally getting out of your own way. You see, the unseen moves when you stop interfering. When you stop trying to prove you're worthy of what's already yours. Life isn't testing you. It's timing you. It's waiting for you to be still enough to receive what's been circling around you the whole time. But people think stillness means nothing's happening. They can't see the invisible gears turning beneath their impatience. They can't see that what feels like waiting is actually preparation. Every storm needs a pause before it clears. Every seed needs darkness before it blooms. That's the pattern. You can't cheat it. You can't rush it. And the ones who try, they break before the blessing arrives. They tear apart what was meant to grow because they couldn't stand the silence between planting and harvest. They call it giving up, but really, they just couldn't handle not being in control. And that's the real tragedy of it all. People don't lose because life's unfair. They lose because they can't stop trying to control what was never theirs to control. They sabotage their own alignment. They force doors open that weren't meant for them. And when they fall through, they blame fate. But all along, the unseen was moving, quietly, patiently, waiting for them to stop shouting long enough to hear it. The moment you stop forcing outcomes, something strange happens. The tension drops, the air shifts, and you start to feel something faint, like a current pulling you in a direction you didn't plan for. That's not coincidence. That's the alignment you were chasing. It was never about making things happen. It was about becoming still enough to notice what was already trying to reach you. Because sometimes the most powerful move you can make is no move at all. Funny thing about people, they disappear when you're low, and then suddenly remember your name when the lights come back on. They call it support, but it's really curiosity. They don't want to help you rise. They just want to make sure they didn't miss the show. When you're broken, when you're quiet, when you're crawling through the dark, they pretend you don't exist. But the moment something starts moving, the moment your name starts echoing in rooms they've never been invited to, they all show up again, smiling, pretending they believed in you all along. The truth is, people don't ignore you because they can't see your worth. They ignore you because your silence makes them uncomfortable. They want proof before they offer praise. They want to see you win before they admit you were right. And the funny part, the same people who once said, "You've changed," will soon whisper, "I always knew you could do it." That's how it works. They vanish when you're invisible, and then reappear when the glow returns, acting like they were holding the flashlight the whole time. It's almost poetic, isn't it? The way the world treats you differently depending on what you have to offer. When you're down, they say, "You're being dramatic." When you rise, they say, "You got lucky." People don't want to see your process. They only want to be seen near your result. They mock your silence, but they worship your success. They'll laugh at your faith until your breakthrough makes them quiet. And when it happens, when everything starts shifting, they won't understand that what they're witnessing isn't luck. It's divine movement finally catching up to you. The irony is that they were part of the plan too. Every rejection, every fake friend, every laugh behind your back, it all played a role. Because if they hadn't turned their backs, you'd still be chasing their validation instead of your vision. You had to lose their noise to hear your own calling. You had to be abandoned to learn that solitude was your sanctuary, not your punishment. Their silence was your training ground. Their absence was the test. And now, as the tables turn, they're about to learn what it feels like to watch what they doubted rise without their help. People who ignored you when you had nothing will soon need the very light you carried through your darkness. The same ones who said you were delusional will come asking for advice. That's how energy works. It circles back. What they laughed at becomes what they seek. And that's not revenge. It's rhythm. Life has a way of showing everyone exactly where they stood when you were standing alone. You don't have to expose them. You just have to keep walking. The light will do the talking for you. When the shift begins, it's not loud. It's subtle. The phone starts ringing again. The ones who ghosted you suddenly just wanted to check in. They'll use soft words like, "I've been meaning to reach out," as if you didn't notice their silence when you were fighting for your sanity. But you won't be angry. Not anymore. You'll just smile, because you'll realize that their return isn't a threat. It's confirmation. Confirmation that you've stepped into a space they can't ignore anymore. The ones who doubted you will start rewriting history. They'll say they were protecting you, that they didn't want to see you get hurt. But the truth is simpler. They didn't believe. They couldn't see beyond the mess, beyond the waiting, beyond the pain. They thought your silence meant defeat. They thought your stillness meant you'd given up. They didn't know that silence was strategy. That while they were talking, you were transforming. It's funny, isn't it, how people are only loyal to results. They can't handle the process because it exposes their own lack of patience. They'll tell you to be realistic. But what they mean is, don't make me uncomfortable by proving what's possible. They want you to stay small, predictable, familiar. But life doesn't move in straight lines. It bends, breaks, rebuilds. And those who laughed while you were in the dark will be blinded when the light finally hits. You'll notice it, that strange shift in energy. Suddenly, the people who said, "You've changed," will start copying your words, your tone, your style. The same ones who ignored your messages will start commenting on your posts. The same ones who left you out will now want you in. That's not coincidence. It's reaction. Because when light moves, darkness always scrambles to stay near it. But you won't chase them anymore. You won't need to. You'll understand that they served their purpose. They were the mirrors that showed you what not to be, the silence that forced you to find your own voice. You'll realize that every time someone walked away, they made more room for what was meant to arrive. You'll stop taking it personally, because you'll see it clearly now. It wasn't rejection, it was redirection. And when they reach out, when they try to reconnect as if they were never gone, you won't even feel bitterness. Just a quiet kind of knowing. Because deep down, you'll recognize what's really happening. They're not drawn to you. They're drawn to what's moving through you. They're drawn to the light they once dismissed. And you'll let them talk. You'll let them smile. You'll let them pretend. Because you'll know something they don't. What's coming next doesn't need validation. It just needs witnesses. Timing, everyone thinks they understand it, but no one really does. They think the world moves according to their clock, that if they plan enough, pray enough, push enough, everything will unfold when they say so. But the truth, the world doesn't care about your schedule. The universe doesn't follow your deadline. Divine timing laughs at your calendar. It shows up right when you've stopped expecting it. Right when disbelief has wrapped its hands around your throat and squeezed every bit of hope out of you. That's when it moves. That's when it shows you it was watching all along. People love to talk about faith, but what they really mean is control. They believe as long as things make sense, as long as progress is visible. But faith isn't believing when it's easy. It's believing when it looks ridiculous. When every sign says, "Give up." When every door slams shut, and you're standing in the middle of nowhere, wondering why nothing's working. That's where timing begins its quiet work. Because it's not that nothing's happening. It's that everything is being arranged in a way your impatience can't yet see. The most dangerous part of the wait isn't the waiting. It's the silence. That still, heavy silence that makes you question if you've been forgotten. You start wondering if you made it all up. If maybe you misunderstood the signs. People around you stop believing too. And their doubt becomes a mirror. You start to reflect it. You start to shrink. You start to convince yourself that the movement you felt before was just wishful thinking. But it wasn't. It was real. It's just that timing hides its hands while it works. It doesn't want to be seen. It wants to be trusted. Divine timing isn't late. It's precise. It waits until every piece has shifted, every person has been placed, every door has been closed that would have distracted you from what's truly meant. You think it's delay, but it's defense. It's protecting you from what isn't ready, from who isn't real, from paths that lead nowhere. But you can't see that while you're begging for instant answers. You think stillness means punishment, but sometimes it's mercy. You ever notice how nothing happens for months, maybe years, and then suddenly everything changes in a single week? That's not coincidence. That's release. That's divine timing snapping into place after being held back by your impatience, your self-doubt, your fear. The universe doesn't rush because it knows rushing creates ruin. You can't handle what's meant for you until you've grown into the person who can hold it. So it waits. Not because it's cruel, but because it's careful. And people hate careful. They want chaos that looks like progress. They want something, anything, to prove the waiting wasn't wasted. They want to see movement even if it's meaningless. But life doesn't work like that. The most powerful movements are invisible until they're unstoppable, like a seed underground, silent, buried, ignored, until one day it breaks the surface and no one can deny it anymore. Everyone calls it sudden success, but you know better. You know how long it took to get there, how long you were underground, unseen, while everyone else bloomed ahead of you. Divine timing doesn't show up to impress people. It shows up to prove a point. That no matter how forgotten you felt, you were always on track. That no matter how many people left, no matter how many doors closed, no matter how long the silence lasted, everything was leading here. But it waits until disbelief has peaked, until even you stop checking the clock. Because only then do you stop trying to steal control. Only then do you finally surrender. And that's the paradox. When you stop chasing, it starts moving. When you stop begging for the outcome, it begins arranging it. The moment you release it is the moment it returns. Not because life's playing tricks, but because faith and control can't exist in the same breath. You can't demand a miracle and still try to manage it. You have to choose one. And when you finally do, timing unfolds like it was waiting for your permission all along. People say, good things take time, but what they forget is that great things take transformation. You can't receive what you're praying for if you're still the same person who started praying. So divine timing holds you there, in the tension, in the discomfort, until you've burned off everything that can't go where you're headed. It's not delay, it's refinement. And when the time finally hits, it doesn't trickle, it floods. Everything that was held back bursts through, all at once, like it was never gone. That's why when it comes, disbelief peaks first, because you almost gave up. You almost convinced yourself it was over, and that's when the universe likes to strike. When your hands are empty, your mind is quiet, and your heart has nothing left but surrender. It moves then, not to reward you, but to remind you. To remind you that you were never forgotten, only being prepared. Because divine timing doesn't care about early. It only cares about ready.